Hi guys! Today we're going to be creating a graph to clearly represent the data from our latest experiment. So you can see on the right hand side of my screen I have the blank graphing page from the Lifeboats notebook, and on the left hand side of my screen I actually have the data table with my data completed. Now for this particular graph we're actually only going to graph the average, which is pretty typical for science. Normally we really do only graph the averages. Now when you complete your 6th grade science project, you may in fact graph your trials. It really just depends on what your project is. But the majority of the time we only graph averages. So the graph on the right, the first thing it needs is a really good title. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm actually going to type my title. I just think it'll make it clearer for my audience who's looking at it. I want to make sure that my text is small enough so that I can get my title on this page. I know that my title needs to include both my independent and my dependent variable. Okay, one title. I want to center it above the grid. And the next thing I want to do is proofread it. Does it start with a capital letter? Does it end with a question mark? Does what I have typed make sense? Now it is my hope that this title looks really familiar. It's actually my experimental question. You'll also find it on the top of my data table, which is kind of nice. My data table and my graph both have the same title, which is going to be really easy for my audience. Whoever is looking at my experiment, they'll know that they're about the same thing. The next thing that I need is titles for both my x-axis, which is the one down here, and my y-axis, which is my vertical axis. Now we talked in class and we talked about the fact that on the x-axis you almost always put your independent variable. So I'm going to go and find my independent variable. There it is, right on my data table in the left-handmost column. I know that my independent variable is boat capacity. That's going to become the title for my x-axis. The one thing I need to be really careful of is I need to leave myself room right here next to the axis to fill in the scale, which will be numbers. So I'm going to go down and go ahead and write my independent variable. Yep, except for I want to write it. Typing it for me would be difficult. If you can type it, please feel free to do so. Again, I'm writing it away from the axis somewhat so that I have room to add numbers. Now the next thing this axis needs are units. In what units did I measure boat capacity? Well, there it is on my data table. Now I need to label or add a title to the y-axis. It looks like I've lost my split screen, so let me get that back. Let's split screen with squid again, please. Back into my Lifeboats notebook. Here we go. I have to be careful. If I get too close to that center bar, it causes me difficulty. So now my graph has a title, my y-axis has a title, my x-axis has a title. The next thing I need to do is figure out what the scaling is for both of these axes. In other words, how am I going to divide these axes, both of them, up into different numbers? The first thing I have to do is figure out how many spaces I have on my x-axis. This is the way I do it. I start here. I know that this corner for my graph is going to be 0. Going this way and that way. I know that this value is going to be 0. So now I've got to count how many spaces I have between 0 and the end. I do it this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way to the end. I do it that way because it helps me count. Then I go in, get my eraser, and I erase those. I happen to know I have 30. So I have 30 spaces to spread out my boat capacity. I'm going to look at my data table. I have to go from 0, which I know is going to have to be my lowest value because that's where my graph starts, to let me look at my data table. My largest boat capacity is 74. So from 0 to 74, well, that's 74 units. And I have 30 spaces. I think I'm going to need a calculator. So I'm going to take 74 which is the range of my data, and I'm going to divide it by the number of spaces I have. And I get 2.46. If I round that down to 2, let's see, 2 times my 30 spaces gives me 60. That's not enough. So counting by 2s across those spaces won't work. I'm going to have to count by 3s. So let's go back to my graph. So going across the bottom, I'm going to have to count by 3s so I can get all of my data on this graph. It is my suggestion that you make the graph a little bigger so you can get all of these numbers in. You want to write the numbers right below the lines. See how my numbers are going directly below the lines? And I'm counting by 3s. That is my scale for this axis of my graph. Now you're probably wondering why I kept writing numbers after 74, because my largest boat capacity is 74. It's important to fill in the entire graph, all the way to 90. And I know that's right because I'm counting by 3s, my scale is by 3s, and I have 30 spaces, and 3 times 30 is 90. Wonderful. One scale on the x-axis. Now let's move on to the y-axis. So for number of penny passengers, again, I know that my bottom value is 0. Let's see what's my largest value for the average number of penny passengers. Looks like it's 37 4/10. So again, I'll have to go up the side counting the spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not going to bore you with watching me count. I counted it earlier. Let me erase this. I happen to know there are 38 spaces. This one's really easy. My scale is going to be a scale of 1. I'm going to count by ones. So again, going up the side, I'm going to count by ones. Again, you want to write the numbers right next to the lines. Whoops. Let's make that a 3. Now, again, as I did on the bottom, on the x-axis, I'm going to make sure I numbered this correctly. I know that I numbered it correctly because I know I'm counting by ones, and there's 38 spaces, and 38 times 1 is 38, and that's the value I have at the top. My next step is actually to plot my points. So I'm going to start over here. My first boat capacity is 14, which is right here in this box. I'm going to go all the way over to the average, and it has an average of 6 4/10. So I'm going to find 14 on my x-axis. It's obviously going to be between 12 and 15, and I'm going to go up to 6.4, which is going to be above 6. Here we go, 14, 6.4. I'm going to put my dot right about there. My next values. My boat capacity is 28. My average is 14.6. So 28, here's 27, here's 30. So 28 will obviously be closer to 27. I'm going to go up until I find, there's 14, and it's 14.6, so it's going to definitely be at least halfway up. My next point to plot will be 52 on the x-axis, because that's boat capacity, and 25.8 on the y-axis. So let's find 52. Well, there's 51. So it's going to be just to the right of 51 and 25.8. So let's go up until I get to 25, which is right there. 25.8 is definitely going to be closer to 26. Come back down, make sure I'm at 52. And my last point is going to be at 74 on the x-axis and 37.4 on the y-axis. Here's 75. Go just to the left of 75 and 37.4. I've now plotted my 4 averages for the 4 different boat capacities. The last thing I need to do is create a trend line. I'm going to change to a lighter color for my trend line so that it's easier to see, and it doesn't cover the points that I've plotted. The first thing you should ask yourself is, looking at this data, will my trend line be a straight line or a curved line? Looking at my data, I think it looks like a straight line. So I'm going to do one continuous straight line, and there's my trend line. Your next question should be, does your trend line match the general trend that you wrote in your notebook? And mine does. My general trend says, as the boat capacity increases, the number of penny passengers increases, and that's actually what my trend line shows. And this is how you create a graph. Thanks, guys.